Welcome to the High EQ Marketer. I'm John Busby. This show is about learning from the best and most interesting marketers in the world, which are, not a coincidence, highly emotionally intelligent. If you'd like inspiration, lessons, war stories from startups or Fortune 500 companies, that's why we're here. So let's go. I met Nicole Wood earlier this year at an in-person conference in real life. She is the CEO and co-founder of Vida, and I absolutely loved her story when I saw her speak on stage. This is an episode about business hustle, about entrepreneurship, about taking a business from 6 years ago into a successful one today. And so we talk a lot about marketing, but Nicole's business is about coaching professionals, coaching folks like you and me. And so we'll talk about coaching marketers, the coaching profession, getting started. So if anyone in your organization or you are passionate about getting started with coaching or what it can do for your organization, this is a great episode for you. Thanks a lot. Hi, Nicole. How are you? Good to see you.
Hi, good to see you. I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. So you and I met at a conference earlier this year, and I heard about where your business is today. You started, you're 6 years in. Sounds like you have more than 50 folks, a mix of coaches and full-time employees. But let's start at the beginning. Your company, Vida. What inspired you to start a business about coaching? And then what's the story behind the name?
Yeah, it goes way back prior to those 6 years. And honestly, to fully understand it, I think you have to go back even way further than that to my college days when I figured out I wanted to be a management consultant. Not a lot of, 12-year-olds figure out that that's the dream that they want. So it wasn't until college that I figured that out. I went to Arizona State University, which is a phenomenal school, but for many reasons, not one that's highly recruited by the top consulting firms. So I figured I'm going to have to cold call my way into this job. So this is pre-LinkedIn days. I got like a printout of all the alumni that had gone on to work in consulting firms, and I picked up the phone and figured out how to do it and got an internship through that. And I tell you all this because I think it sets the stage for how frustrated and confused I was when I got a few years into that career path and realized it wasn't the long-term thing for me. It was a great place to start my career. You learn so much as a consultant, but once I realized, hey, my bosses and bosses, that's not the future that I want. What the heck is it? I was pretty demoralized and lost. And luckily, at the same time, my firm had given me a leadership coach because I'd been promoted. And I was pretty much a terrible client. I was really skeptical. I was like, what is this? Had never heard of it before, but found it so tremendously valuable that ultimately launched a whole business around it, but continued working with my coach separate from my firm. And she helped coach me through figuring out what was next, realizing that I hadn't wasted time going through this path, but it was kind of all building toward something else. And so when I looked around and saw so many of my peers, particularly the millennial generation, that was feeling this kind of tension between, can I do something fulfilling that's also going to pay my bills? I realized that this coaching was a tool that people didn't know about and really wanted to create something that felt more accessible, affordable, and a little less squishy than a lot of the other coaching that was in the marketplace. And the name specifically, one of the initial offerings that we had done where we were launching a coaching retreat, but also kind of getting some initial feedback from early clients was in Ecuador. The national slogan of Ecuador is Ama la Vida, which means love life. And it just stuck with me as this is what it's all about. Like if we're working the majority of our waking hours, whether it's someone's health, their life as a leader, their career path, if they're not loving life, then what's it all for? And so that's still kind of why we exist as an organization, is to help people do that via coaching.
That's such a cool story. There's so many questions I want to ask you. But one of the things that's is like a through line between everyone that I speak to, I think, that gets into a leadership position, you're a CEO, or whether I talk to a CMO or leader in another part of the organization, is how important hustle and grit is. It's not easy to cold call, a bunch of alumni and a bunch of companies and send emails, bunch of which probably were never responded to, and to feel like you can get to the next level of something. When you think about the early days of Ama La Vida, what type of like hustle or grit stuff did you have to do at the very beginning to get off the ground?
A ton. We talked a lot about like we're planting a lot of seeds. We're planting a lot of seeds. Eventually they'll grow, and many of them have. I think hustle is important for my co-founder and I always say patience and hustle. We actually have necklaces that say that to remind us because I think it's a combination of both. And Ariana Huffington has a quote that I like to remind myself, especially when I can feel like my knuckles whitening when things are tougher and I'm going too far into the hustle, which is life is a dance between making it happen and letting it happen. And I think that's important. But there's so much stuff we did. We were schlepping our butts all around Chicago doing free workshops or trying all kinds of silly marketing tactics or speaking anywhere anyone would let us speak just to kind of get the onesie twosies here and there. And it feels at the time like nobody's listening and like nothing comes of it, but compounded over time, it really helped us get off the ground, especially being a bootstrap business where we had to be crafty and scrappy. And I think the spirit of that still exists today.
And how do you, I want to go back to what you were saying about misconceptions about coaching. Sometimes it's like, you've got to get a really expensive coach. This person is a guru, they're like a whisperer for your career. You have to speak with them. And also sort of the internal skepticism of why do I need a coach? Is there something wrong with me? Or is this therapy? Like what is this? I guess two-part question. Since you initially got your coach way back when your management consulting days, what's changed as far as people's perception about coaching? And then what kind of misconceptions or myths about coaching still remain today?
The industry has changed tremendously since then. Back when I first had a coach, and then even when we first started, it was 98% sole proprietors. It was individuals who were experts in their field or the guru types who started their own coaching practice. And were great at that. And it was only over the past handful of years that you started to see brands like ours and many of our competitors that said, hey, this is something that we really need to put some intention behind making a more consistent experience and kind of validating the credibility of coaches and separating out the noise. It's still an unregulated industry. So unlike a therapist, to be a licensed therapist, you have to have a license. Anyone can create an Instagram account tomorrow and be like, I'm a coach, and no one's there to tell them not to, besides me. And so it's great to see that the industry has shifted and that there are bodies now that accredit programs and organizations like ours that put some structure around this so that you can kind of weed out what's the right service for you. But there's still tons, to your point, of misconceptions. I think people typically think about either the like super senior white hair retired exec who became a coach, to your point, that's going to charge you $40,000 a year to work with them, or they think of the hippy dippy yogi that's doing a pose on a mountain that's going to be more of the spiritual type coach. And they kind of miss everything in the middle, which is where most people fall in terms of I need someone to help be a guide, be a mirror to me, hold me accountable, and help me achieve my goals, versus something that's more on the kind of polar ends of it. And so there's a really big gap in knowledge still. It feels like old news to us, but the majority of our clients have never worked with a coach before. They're not sure the difference between therapy, mentorship, consulting, and coaching. And so there's a big educational process that we go through with all of our clients to help them understand what it is that we do and what it is that we don't do. And I think probably the biggest is that the client still has to do the work. People will come to us, they're like, just get me a job. We're not recruiters. We're not a placement agency. We can help provide the tools for you to get there, but you're still the one in the driver's seat.
Yeah, and I guess when you sign up with a client and they're like bought in conceptually or theoretically to coaching and why it's important, they have made a conscious effort that they want to invest in in their staff and their employees and their colleagues. That's really good.
Mhm.
And then they may ask, how do we know if this is a good thing? And you're not going to know overnight probably, except for except for the employees feeling happy that they're being invested in. But what type of how do you coach an organization to measure success of a program like this?
There's some immediate things that are consistent across the board. So things that you mentioned, like employee sentiment. So that can be baked within our coaching engagement in terms of surveying or within their existing survey or employee listening platforms. The biggest one for dollars and cents is obviously retention, are the people who are going through these
Mm-hmm.
programming sticking around longer. But then outside of that, it's what's the goals of that organization and the coaching engagement. So, for example, one of our clients crafted with us a specific program for their female leaders because they were realizing their female leaders in a
Mm-hmm.
historically male dominated industry were dropping off at that director level and weren't seeing that advancement. And so we measured how their performance reviews were they getting promoted? And it really was, how are we actually determining if the impact that was intended is taking place? So some of it is specific to each individual client, and some of it is across the board. Okay, are they more engaged? Are they happier? Are they achieving their goals?
That makes a ton of sense. I wonder also if there are other things that a company can do alongside a coaching engagement that kind of work. Something that makes sense to me perhaps is like a rotation program.
Hmm.
When I was at Amazon, it was encouraged that employees every year or two kind of rotate to a different part of the organization or even a different function. And I know for myself, I didn't start in marketing. I started in product, and over time, I discovered that marketing was more interesting to me, but it took a while to get there. And if the company that I was at didn't allow me to move disciplines, I probably would have had to exit the company. So whether it's a rotation program or something else, like what do the best in class organizations do when they also invest in coaching?
It's a really great question. I don't think there's like that's a perfect example, and that might have made sense for Amazon. It might not make sense in another organization. I think ultimately the value of those programs is the empathy that you get from having walked in all those different shoes. And I think that's probably
Mm-hmm.
at the heart of what any of those types of initiatives can do, which is treat the employee like a human being first and a worker second. And so I think the companies, like coaching can't exist in isolation, especially for one individual. We'll see all the time companies are like, well, this person is struggling with this and we want to coach them. Great. Well, how is their manager engaged? How is the rest of the team culture
Mm-hmm.
surrounding them? Because they're going to feel like they're swimming upstream if they're having all this growth and that's not supported by those they're
Mm-hmm.
interacting with every day. So I totally agree with you. It can't be just one thing, but I think the employers that are doing it well are the ones that are looking at how do we support these individuals as human beings, whether that's through other wellness oriented programming, whether that's through flexibility, whether that's through pay transparency, whether that's through DEI work. I think it all is intertwined in creating the right collective atmosphere that helps any of these individual initiatives be successful.
Yeah, and I can say through anecdotal evidence over the course of my career, when either I or my team or my colleagues are seen, you use the term treated like human beings, like seen and heard, can be themselves, um, and are fulfilled. The company just wants to look at it as a dollars and cents profit endeavor, like that's profitable because um, happy, fulfilled folks seem to be more productive too. Do you have any data that supports that?
Nothing's jumping out at me, but I think you're right that it feels like there's a friction between doing what's right and doing what's profitable, and I don't think that they're not aligned. I think it's just hard to prove, and that's ultimately the challenge that we always come up against, and why we have to go back to retention or some of these other measures. You have to get to the dollars and cents to prove the story
Hmm.
of something that's so obvious that happy people
Right.
work
Right.
hard. And I think part of the challenge that I'm in particular seeing over the past year with all of the quiet quitting, no, it's actually quiet firing, is this
Hmm.
narrative
Hmm.
we're all fueling of that it's employee versus employer. And there are some, you know, difficult employers out there that aren't looking out for the good of their employees. But I think more often than not, employers are just people in the organization who want to do the right thing. And it's about giving the right tools to them to be able to do that. And I think for us to actually make change and to solve some of these problems, we have to be aligning those two things and stop pitting employees and employers against one another.
I agree with that. You know, yeah, the verses and the pitting against each other and is the wrong way to think about it. I mean, there is a value
Of
exchange
course.
for sure, but we spend so much time at work, creating a happy community, like a happy community at home,
Hmm.
is essential to having a happy family life and a successful family life. So the same things need to translate into work. I want to shift gears a little bit, since a lot of the folks who are listening to this are either run marketing organizations or think a lot about marketing or interested in marketing. And so I know that you and your team coach all kinds of folks, sales folks, IT, whatever. But is there anything unique that you find about people in marketing or want to get into marketing, and how it applies to how you and your company coach those folks?
Hmm. Yeah, a lot of what we do is career transition coaching. So we see a lot of people getting into marketing, leaving marketing, and then, of course, the leadership people. So people moving up in the world of marketing. I think there are some things that are unique and also feel unique, but are more universal. Um, so things like m- misconceptions about what marketing entails, or the probably going back to the 22-year-old me thinking this was going to be this big sexy thing, for marketing, wanting to do all the fancy stuff and then realizing, wow, this is a lot of math. This is a lot of analytical work that I didn't
Right.
anticipate. But I think more often what we see is that marketing's a big word. It means a lot of different things, and so there's such variety in roles, but there's also such variety in where those roles take place. So I'll say often the nature of the work is almost less important than the how the work gets done. So if you're in an agency creating content, that's going to look totally different from if you're in a startup creating content from if
Hmm.
you're in a 100-year organization. And so a lot of times people will come to us and say, I hate marketing because I hate this job. And it's like, well, do you hate marketing, or are you in a situation that's not aligned with how you best operate? And let's really break that down and understand how you do your best work, and then find the environment that's most aligned with who you are.
Yeah, that I like where you're going with that. One of the things that I've struggled with my own career, or when I think about coaching others, or when I see other folks in the organization that want to move up to the next level, like everybody has strengths and everybody has weaknesses. And I know there's no one size fits all answer, but how do you think about like what's more important? Is it more about harnessing my strengths or making sure I'm set up to be doing a job where my strengths are there, or is it like buttoning up my number one weakness so it doesn't hold me back?
You're right. There's no one size fits all, but I'll throw a number out there anyway. I would say it's 90% focus on your strengths and 10% build awareness and strategies around your weaknesses. And less so I would say even the button up the weakness, more uncover your blind spots. So I think when people hear weaknesses, they're like, oh, I'm not great at this
Mm,
skill versus the, oh, when I'm under stress, I behave in this way, and that's how that hinders me. I think those are the tougher things to
mm,
uncover, but actually create greater impact than a skill set that you can kind of build on. So I would say 10% of your time, keep uncovering those blind spots. And there's lots of ways to do that. And 90% of the time, focus on really amplifying your strengths and building awareness around your strengths because that's what's going to get you noticed. That's what's going to bring you confidence. That's what's going to, when you're having a tough day, fuel you with energy. I think there's so much more value there than if you're spending all of your time trying to bring something up to speed that's never going to get to 100%.
yeah. I'm really glad that you said that. I mean, I think about folks, kind of a cheesy term, but I think about my colleagues' superpower and like what are they in the top 1% of, and how can they be doing that all of the time? And hopefully that's also the thing. I suspect it is. It's also the thing that they like to do because they've gotten better at it over
Exactly.
time. With respect to the blind spots, like how do you uncover those? I mean, I know coaching is a
Hmm.
part of it, but one of the things that seems to be an issue is let's say you're a manager and you have a blind spot with respect to how you work with your team, the folks that report to you, and everybody in the team knows it's an issue,
Hmm.
right? But they can't find the way to kind of communicate it to the manager, so the manager never knows.
Yep.
Um, how do you kind of break down that dynamic?
Yeah, obviously coaching is an extremely effective tactic for that, but even within coaching, we often utilize different assessments to help bring some of those things to light. So whether that's a 360 or something like a Hogan, where you're actually capturing the data that can be shared with you that feels
Mm,
um, less hurtful when it gets delivered because it's just a profile and not
hmm
an attack. I think that's one mechanism. I think to your point, just dialogue is really helpful, but we ask questions in ways that don't tee us
hmm
up to get good answers. So if you just say to your team, what can I be doing better?
mm,
Probably no one's going to have it top
mm,
of mind, feel confident enough to say that difficult thing to you. So you have to find better ways to get the
mm,
answers that you want. So maybe that's something like um, something
mm,
you did identify. Like I felt like there was a communication gap in that last meeting. My sense is this, what was your take? Or
mm,
finding another trusted advisor, like
mm,
someone who's a peer or someone in a kind of neutral group that you can get that feedback from. But I think it's about finding better questions to get to those answers because so often we're well big time even in our one-on-ones, and if you're doing that you're already ahead because most people aren't, but like, hey, how can we be working better, how can I be better? 99 times out of 100 you're not going to get a helpful answer to that question, so it's about rephrasing it and asking in a way that gives them the safety to give you something productive.
yeah, and I think there's also something that I've learned over the course of my career, which is when leaders actively, or anyone, when but I'll just say leaders, when leaders are actively trying to figure out how they can do better and acknowledge that they have weaknesses that can be corrected, that's seen as a positive thing by everyone else, as opposed to some of the situations where I admit early in my career I've had this, and I've seen it in others, is not wanting to acknowledge or face something for kind of fear of not being able to move
Mm,
up, and it actually is like the inverse of that.
totally.
So
That's such a great point, and I think
yeah,
it creates the atmosphere where that feedback can be welcomed if you're in real time being vulnerable and sharing things that you're working on or when you screwed up, because then
Mm-hmm.
people feel
Mm-hmm.
that you are open to that versus this infallible being that
Mm-hmm.
can't receive
Mm-hmm.
any feedback.
Mm-hmm. How do you coach an organization? Like probably, someone who's listening to this, there's someone in their organization who's passionate about coaching. They don't know how to build. They don't know how to build the
Mm.
case, and because it's gonna cost a lot of money. It's gonna be really, uh, you know, whatever. It's only going to be for certain people. Other people are going to be excluded. Whatever the reasons not to do it. What would you say about, like, how would you pitch? Here's the investment you'd need to make as a proof of concept in order to see if this is something you wanted to roll out more broadly across your organization.
It's a great question. I think there are those tangible things that we talked about already that let's figure out what is key to that organization. If it's a real practical goal, like we have revenue goals as a sales team, we're not performing, we want to focus on performance. Great, let's talk about that. If it is a cultural
Mm,
measure or a retention measure, let's talk about that too. But I think more often than not, we're not coming into organizations that don't believe in developing people. They're just going about it in the wrong way. And so they're spending money on massive training
mm,
programs where they're bringing experts in or organizations in to train through webinars or in person, whatever the format is. And not, training is fantastic, but it doesn't create sustained habit change on its own. So to me, it's less even
mm,
about
mm, mm,
how do we build the case for this thing, and more what are you already spending on and what's the sunk cost of that without
mm,
actually bringing this down to the individual
mm,
level. Because we've all been there. You go to a training, you're energized, you walk out the door, you forget everything, and you don't change your day job the next day. And so the beauty of coaching when coupled with these other initiatives is it makes it real for that individual, and it helps create the behavior that actually drives the change the organization was getting at in the first place, which I think is so much more impactful, and is pretty clear in terms of the numbers when you add in all those expenses.
yeah. So you were in the process of building your own company over the last 6 years, and I want to focus on the marketing part of that. You mentioned a bunch of stuff that you did. Can I speak at a conference? Can I
Mhm.
canvass the neighborhood? What can I call people? To call people that I know. Can I plant seeds? What are some of the lessons you learned at the beginning in building your company? Maybe whether it's wow, this really works, or holy crap, this did not work.
I think we've done just about everything that did not work and have narrowed it down to what has for us. But I say this often, and I think it's true of marketing. I think it's true of a lot of products. I think there are very few inherently good or bad. Well, there's definitely bad ideas, um, but good or bad initiatives or tactics. It's to me what's right for that business at that stage in its maturity. And so I think what I've learned over time is we tried stuff in year one that was a total flop because for whatever reason, we didn't have the audience for it. We didn't have the elevation in our brand to that point that needed it to be work. We didn't have
Hmm.
the then downstream nurturing process to make it successful. We tried a ton of stuff that just wasn't right for where we were. So I think it's this real reality check and
Hmm.
constant understanding of who and where you are as a business to find the strategies that are right for you at that time, while also accepting that you may need to still employ strategies that or tactics that aren't where you want to be long term. So, for example, we're still in a place where a huge volume of our revenue comes from CPC Google ads. Do we love it? Absolutely not. Is it the
Hmm.
reality of where we are as a business? Yes.
Hmm.
We have plans for how we're going to rely more on own channels, how we're doing more audience building, but it's something that we know is where we are today and not where we're going to be long term. And I think so much of our evolution, even in how we staffed and hired and when we brought on agencies, has just come to down to we are bootstrapped. We have the dollars in the bank that we have today, what's right for today, and how do we get to where we want to be next year?
Yeah. I think I agree what you're saying, that that what's going to be successful for your company is totally dependent on the situation. But I think what I'm picking up from what you're saying is that in a startup, you want to be testing lots of different things, because it's almost impossible to predict what marketing tactic is going to work. And so the more things you try, the more chance you have to find something that's positive ROI. So I would say that's definitely a best practice. And now that you're 6 years in, how did you decide like what to do yourself with marketing versus hiring an agency or hiring an internal marketing staff?
This has also evolved. I think we've gone through similar evolutions in our maturity, where a lot of aspects of marketing we either started out doing ourselves or not doing at all, and then got to the point where we could hire maybe a freelancer or someone part-time to work on it, and then over time either a full-time hire or an agency. I think we've leaned on agencies for really specific expertise that don't need to be super deeply integrated into the team. And we've seen the value that can happen when you have folks who do this all day, every day. And then things on the team that are more personal to us. And then the things that still remain with me, like I am crazy about word choice and language. And because so much of what we do is so personal, it is based on mine and forum stories, and I believe that there's no better people to tell it than us, that a lot of the content that we still produce, even just simple things like our about us on the website, I'll still write a lot of that because I feel that the authenticity comes through in the voice when it's from the source versus from someone else. So I still probably too tightly control a bit of that. While I'm not an expert in all of those other areas, and have slowly been able to outsource those either to team members or outside agencies.
Yeah, it's really hard to scale authenticity or personality. So I'm totally vibing with you on the word choice. I think if one of my colleagues is listening to this, I think that she's empathizing greatly with this conversation. So let's end here. Someone is listening, saying they want coaching. What should they do next?
They should make sure that coaching is actually what they need. So that quick gut check first around, do I actually want therapy? Do I actually want mentorship? We have tons of resources to help you figure that out. But a big piece, like I said, is making sure someone's coaching ready and they're committed to do the work. But once they're ready, you can find us at alvcoaching.com. A big component of coaching is finding the right relationship between coach and coachee. And so we have a really distinctive process for how we pair folks. And so that's the big first step is, in addition to making sure this is what you want to pursue and the right resource for your goal, is then making sure you're paired with the right individual who's going to help you get there.
Love it. Nicole, so great to see you.
You too. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to The High EQ Marketer. Subscribe to us anywhere you listen to podcasts. And if you enjoyed this episode, please drop us a like, rate the show 5 stars. That's the high EQ thing to do. Thanks for listening.